Yes.
There we go.
Okay, great. And so, okay. And then Sarah Smith is up. Okay. Sorry, everyone. Thanks for rolling with the punches on those. It's always fun. Okay, so Sara is the current chair of our propagation team, although she's handing that off kind of soon, or going co-chair. I can't decide which, how much we can keep her back in. And Sara is amazing because she actually works on the propagation volunteer team over at Duke Gardens as well. And so really has kind of a breadth of experience with this and knows how to propagate. If she doesn't know how to propagate it, she certainly knows how to ask Dur how to propagate it, and which is what we all do for propagation anyway. So, so with that, Sara, I will let you take over.
Okay. Hi. I'm on a mission. Well, actually, Master Gardeners are on a mission. If you're like me, when you decided that you were going to join the Master Gardener program because you were just crazy about plants. And not only did you want to learn everything about it, but you wanted to talk to everybody about it. And unlike my sister, whose eyes roll in the back of her head whenever I start gushing about a plant, you want to talk to people who really like to talk to plants, you know, people that come up to you and say, I have a problem. Would you like to talk to me about this problem? So, but that was enough for me when I joined in 2009. But now there's a more important and compelling reason for our mission. And we, as Master Gardeners, are charged with teaching our community to set up and maintain a carbon sequestering factory or plant in their own environments. So plants are beautiful and they're nutritious, but they're also one of our best bets for climate change. So now let's find out how to make more of them, because everybody needs more plants. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Everybody can see that?
Yes. Looks good.
Okay. Plants are, to me, are just the most amazing things. That the fact that they are so diverse and that they have covered this globe from the bottom of the ocean all the way up to a tiny cleft in a rock at the top of a mountain, from rainforests to deserts. And they didn't do this by just seeds alone. As a matter of fact, flowers and seeds are a fairly new adaptation for them. They also, unlike us, can reproduce vegetatively. Now, it's a broad subject, but for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to limit it to starting seeds and some of the vegetative things that we do. So what are some of the advantages of propagating with seed for plants? Because like I said, this is an early adaptation. And one of them is that they get the genetic diversity. By plants intermingling with each other, they keep the gene pool strong. And if you notice that picture up there, that actually is a columbine. It's a pink and white columbine. So one of the advantages is they get mutations and adaptation. And this is something that has allowed them to be so successful, is because when they send out their seeds, that genetic diversity can cause mutations that make the seedlings more adaptable to a changing environment. Dispersal is another one. With vegetative propagation, they can move, but their movement is somewhat limited. But with seeds, especially those that fly in the air, or those that have animals and birds disperse, those plants can just send their seedlings all over the world. Oh, and humans too. Humans are a really good dispersal for plants. And the seeds are drought tolerant. With cuttings, one of the things that you'll find out is that as soon as you cut that branch off, that cutting is in a race to grow roots before it dries out. Drying out is just death to the cutting. But seeds have this nice little seed coat that is genetically engineered not to break dormancy until it's in exactly the right environment for that seedling. Now, what are some of the advantages to us? Well, if you look at the picture, this is a columbine that is a mixture of the pink and white columbine and a blue one. And this one is growing happily up at my son's house. So varieties is the first advantage to us. We can make all kinds of varieties. It's also economical. You can buy for about $2, you can buy between 25 and 100 seeds and have that many plants. If you tried to buy 25 to 100 plants, it would cost you an arm and a leg. And it's fun. It's always fun to be creative, and seeds are one of the most creative ways that we have. Also, one of the advantages to starting seeds is that a lot of our favorite plants are tropical, and they need a long season to go from germination to fruiting, like tomatoes are tropical. So being able to start the seeds indoors and give them that extra boost is the reason why we have impatiens that flower, because impatiens, if we put impatiens seeds outside after our last frost date, we would never see blooms. But then now I know that this is the season of the seed catalog, and we're all sitting around just absolutely waiting to go through page after page of these wonderful pictures and the descriptions. But there's a couple of things that I want you to consider before you actually buy any seeds. And the first one is the growth habit of the plant. Do you have room for this plant to grow? I went to a seed swap and got some Indian bitter melon seeds, which I was really interested in because I was doing some home herbal medicines, and this Indian bitter melon always came up. So I rushed home and I pulled up a video on how to grow it. And the guy that was doing the video, he had a camera and he started raising this camera up as he was talking. And he had them in a big pot. And I said, good, I've got a big pot. And then he raised it up and it was growing around a tomato cage. And I thought, no problem, I've got a tomato cage. And then he kept raising it up like this. And it got to the point where the vine had grabbed hold of the porch pole and was wrapping itself around the porch pole and then up across the roof. And I thought, I don't have the room for this plant. So I've never done that. And the next thing is you want to know whether this plant, the seed is a direct sow or a transplant. And when the package says direct sow, it's talking about planting it outside after our last frost date. And some of the plants that do well with the direct sow are plants that have long roots, like carrots. They don't want to be disturbed once they sprout. So they're best to go outside. When they talk about transplants, they're talking about starting the seeds indoor before the last frost date and then transplanting them out. Now, in order to propagate seeds, you're going to need 5 things. You're going to need a growing medium, pots, light, warmth, and moisture. And we're going to go through each one of them. The growing medium that you use, it can be, there's 2 things that seeds need to germinate. One thing is they need air, and one thing is they need moisture, but they need moisture that drains. They don't need to be wet. So these seed starting mixes, commercial seed starting mixes, or a high grade potting soil that does not have fertilizer in it are both good things to do. I always use the seed starting mix because for one thing, it has perlite in it, which allows the air pockets, and it's made with either peat moss or coir, and those 2 things will retain moisture, but the peat moss, but the perlite also allows it to drain. So it's and it's sterile. Now, pots, plants, seedlings and plants, they're not too picky about their pots. You can do just about, you can use anything from seed trays or, egg crate. I've seen people start them in egg cartons. You can put them in any kind of pot that you want. One of the things that I have to say is that you have to have a size where the seedling can take up all of the moisture in that pot without having any left over, because if there's any left over, then you negate the airspace, and it's very important. It's important to have airspace as it is to have moisture. If you water a plant outside, then any extra water is going to be wicked away by the area around it. The soil will wick it away and make it neutral, but that doesn't happen when it's in a pot. So basically you want it about 1 to 1.5 inches wide to about 1.5 to 2 inches deep is a good normal size. But just keep that in mind when you're choosing a pot or when you're choosing your seedling trays, according to the size of the little seedling is going to be. One thing for sure you want to do when you're starting seeds indoors is you want everything to be sterile. It doesn't matter what you can reuse your trays in your pots, but you have to sterilize them and just give them a little wash and then soak them for about 10 minutes in a solution of 1 part chlorine to 9 parts water. And that'll just take care of anything that's on there and you can go ahead and use them. And one of the reasons why you don't want to use regular soil or homemade compost is that it can carry pathogens. Light is the next thing. Now this light is a little bit different between the germination stage and after they've germinated. Most seedlings need light to germinate, but there are some seedlings that need to have complete darkness. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is a little wintergreen that I grew. And this one I had to put in the tray, cover it, put it in the refrigerator for 3 months, and then take it out and put it on a pad. But this is one of the ones that needs darkness in order to germinate. Once the seedlings have germinated, all seedlings need light. So if you have some that it says you have to cover it and put it in darkness in order to germinate it, take it out as soon as you see that it's coming up and put it in its light source. Now, seedlings, as soon as they come out of the seed, they're going to reach for their light. So you want to keep your light source about 2 to 4 inches above the tops of them. So it's always good when you're setting something up to either be able to adjust the height of your seedlings and trays or just the height of the lights. And I have a window over here because there's a lot of people that will take a sunny window in order to germinate their seedlings, which is fine as long as you keep in mind that you're going to be germinating your seedlings while it's still cold, and it will get cold there at night. So just pull the seedlings away from it at night and then put them back. And another thing is these little seedlings are going to be reaching for that light. So just give them a little quarter turn every once in a while so that they don't grow out sideways. Warmth is another one that is different for the germination stage than the seedling stage. You want warmth for germinating them, and the warmth should be between 75 and 80 degrees. And the easiest way to do that is a commercial seed mat, but you can also find a nice warm spot like the top of the refrigerator or the top of a hot water heater. But as soon as they germinate, as soon as the little seedlings come up, take them off of that warmth and just put them in a regular room temperature. Now, moisture is probably the trickiest part of it because it's like Goldilocks. You can't get it too wet and you can't get it too dry. When you're getting ready to put your seeds in the seed tray, fill the seed tray, wet it down, and then let it just drain for about 30 minutes. Plant your seeds in it after the moisture is already in there. I learned this the hard way. If you plant your seeds in dry seed starting mix and then you try to water it, all of your seedlings are going to be at one end of the tray. They just wash right down there. You want to cover your containers as soon as you plant your seeds. So let me go back a step. Put the seeds in the seed tray on moist medium, cover them up, and then take a mist bottle and mist the new soil that you put on top, just to make sure there's a good contact with the seed. And then that's all you need to do. Put your dome on there, and it can be any kind of a dome. It can be a plastic bag, it can be a regular commercial dome, anything that you want to keep that humidity up and to keep the soil from drying out. You will have to have drainage so that it doesn't sit right in there, but just keep it from drying out. Once those seedlings start to show, take that dome off. You don't want to keep that moisture trapped in there. Let's see, a moisture meter that thing that's on the left-hand side is fairly inexpensive. And I use that a lot when I'm doing my seed starting, just to make sure. And it should be just like it shows in the picture, right there in the middle in the green part. And also, if you have some air that can circulate over your seedlings and keep that surface a little bit dry, that's going to be good. I always water my seedlings from the tray, from the bottom, and let the medium wick it up, because I want to keep that surface dry, and we'll find out later why. I'll talk a little bit why about that. Labels and records are something that I learned about the hard way. Labels can be anything that you want. The ones on the left are some that I bought down at the scrap exchange, and I just put a little bit of acrylic paint on it. And when I want to change them, I just take a razor blade and pull the acrylic paint off and put some more. But the one that I have found that is the best and longest lasting is just a Venetian blind slat with lead pencil. And that, the one on the right, and it will last outdoors, even outdoors, for at least a year. So I recommend it. They're inexpensive, and it's a good way to upcycle information stuff. Record keeping is something that I was resistant to, and I know there's a lot of other people that would rather be out in their gardens doing stuff than coming back inside and making notes. But I found that it is very valuable when the year next spring, a year later, and you're going, oh yeah, celebrity, that's a really good tomato, or mortgage lifter, that's a great tomato, let's do that. And then you forgot that it didn't do very well in your garden, and that you had made up your mind last year that you were not going to get that one again. Record keeping is also a good way that somebody recommends a variety to you. You can write that into your records so that when you go back to it, you have it right there. So, and it can be anything that you want. It can be anything as fancy as a spreadsheet to just a notebook. I highly recommend it. And right now I'm going to do a little bit of troubleshooting before we get to the final stage of seed starting, just to let you know what you're going to be looking for and how to correct it if you see it. And the first one is nothing came up, poor germination. And there's a couple of things that you can check with this one. And the first one is that the seeds that you use just are no longer viable. And a very easy test for that is to take 10 seeds, put it in a moistened paper towel, and put it in a plastic bag. Just wrap them up in a moistened paper towel, slip them into a plastic bag, and leave them in there for the amount of time that the packet says that it will take to germinate, and then open it up. And if you get 50% germination, then you know that your seeds are viable. If you get, well, I would say more than 50%. If you get 50% or around 50%, then you might want to just double up the amounts of seeds that you're going to put in each cell. If you get less than 50%, I would say the seeds are not viable and you need to get a new packet. Also, the seeds may need a special treatment. And as I said in the very beginning, they have a hard seed coat that is designed to keep that seed from germinating until everything is correct, until the environment is right. And if you pay attention, most of the flowers will produce their seeds at the end of the season, and the last thing they want is those seeds to germinate in the middle of the winter. So there's a process called stratification where they have to go through at least 3 months of cold weather before they'll germinate. And we can emulate that. We can take our seeds that need to be stratified and just put them in the refrigerator and then take them out at the end of 3 months and plant them. It takes a little bit of forward thinking and a little bit of planning, but that's easy enough to do. As I said, plants are motivated to propagate themselves. All we have to do is learn how they do it and just emulate it. Another special treatment is when plants have designed their fruit around their seeds so they attract animals and birds. And what they want is that seed to go through the animal, but not in a process that will take that seed further away. And when it goes through the gut of the animal, what happens is the stomach acids break that seed coat down. And this is called scarification. And we can do that same process. Most of the time, just rubbing it a little sandpaper on it will crack that seed in order to get the air and the water in it. More harder seeds to do may take a little snip with a razor blade or with a pair of scissors. One of my favorite plants is a plant called roselle. And roselle is one of those plants that needs a little bit of help to get air and water into it. So I usually just snip it with a pair of scissors and then pre-soak it. And pre-soaking is one of the things that a lot of plants really benefit from. And I'm going to tell my secret that I'm more of a vegetable gardener than an ornamental gardener here, because my examples for this is beets, carrots, parsley, parsnips, okra, and spinach like to be pre-soaked. And out of that list, they like about an 8-hour pre-soak, except for okra. And okra only wants 4 hours. So it doesn't want an overnight soak. It wants to, you get up in the morning, you put your seeds in the water, you go out and plant and everything, come in and eat lunch, and then go out and plant your okra. Corn and beans don't want a full soak. What they want is to be wrapped up in a moist paper towel and left overnight. So just make sure that you research it. If it isn't on the packet, and a lot of times this is not on the seed packet, but if you have poor germination, just take a look and see if one of those exists. And if neither one of those situations exist, then you can start looking at your environment. And what I mean by environment is your lights, your warmth, your moisture, and those things that you've set up to begin with. And isn't that the saddest thing that you can see? I tell you, you're successful, your seeds are up, they're growing, you're so happy, and then you come in one day and they're all falling over, and there isn't a thing that you can do to it. And this is one of the reasons why I say keep your surface of your soil dry. This is called damping off, and it's caused by a fungus that gets into damp soil, and it gets into the top portion of the damp soil, and then it's taken up into the plant and clogs up the vascular system. And at this point, there isn't anything that you can do about it. Discolored or faded leaves, whenever you see this, you need to get on it pretty quick. You can save the plant on this one, but you have to act pretty fast. There's a couple of things that will cause this. One of them is overwatering, again, too damp a soil. If that's the case, then I hate to say this, but you have to start over again. It can also be fertilizer burn. When plants come up, they have these little cotyledons, these little flat leaves that first come out, and those leaves have all the fertilizer and nutrition that little seedling needs in order to get its first leaves. And at that point, you might want to give it just maybe a half mixture of organic fertilizer. But before then, no fertilizers, which is one of the reasons why I say, if you're going to get commercial grade potting soil, don't use the ones that have fertilizer in it, because that fertilizer can actually burn the roots of those tiny seedlings. And the third one that causes this is sunburn. And this is what happened to this plant. This is one that my husband was growing, and he just didn't pay attention, and it grew up into the lights, and it got sunburned. Leggy seedlings, we talked a little bit about these seedlings that are just growing like crazy towards the light. This one was on the outer side of the group, and it was doing its best just to get in there and for competition. This can happen also if the light is too far away. Most of the time it happens when the light is too far away. And what happens is that seedling just works so hard to put out growth that the stem becomes weak, and which makes it flop over like that. It's a good idea, even if you have even if you don't have leggy seedlings, to exercise your plants. And I don't mean get them out and make them run around, but when I go through my plants, I just like to just kind of rub the plant a little bit like this and just move it, because when they're out in the outside, the wind is going to move them back and forth, and that hardens up that stem a little bit. A fan that is an indirect fan that just moves the air in the room is always a good idea too. And that fan will help with my nemesis, the fungus gnat. I don't know who sends out the invitation, but they always show up for the party. Fungus gnats, the adults are not so bad, but what does the damage are the larvae in the soil, and the fungus gnats will lay their eggs in the first quarter inch of wet soil or moist soil, and the fan will help get the adults, keep them from landing, which is a good idea. And you can also get these yellow sticky tapes, but I have found that I get trapped in the sticky tapes more than the gnats do, so I gave that up. The thing that works the best for me is to put perlite on the surface, water from the bottom to make sure that the surface stays dry, and then put perlite on the surface to break their life stage, so they can't get down there and plant eggs. So here we go. You're successful. You have your little plants and you're ready to put them outside, but they have been growing from germination inside in a protected area. You cannot take your beautiful little seedlings and put them outside without hardening them off. And what hardening off is basically is just getting them used to the outside where they're going to be growing a little bit at a time. So the first time that you're going to take your plants out will be on a nice day when there's very little breeze, and you're going to put them in the shade for an hour or two. Bring them back in. And then over the period of 2 weeks, you're just going to keep putting them out more and more. And if you hit a night that is nice and warm, you can leave them out overnight. Of course, bring them in if it's going to rain or there's going to be a hard wind or anything like that. I usually put mine out in the shade the first couple of days and then put them in dappled sunlight, and then just very gradually introduce them. And then at the end of 2 weeks, they will be completely ready to go out into your garden and give you lots and lots of food, or flowers if you're an ornamental person. So before I get into the vegetative propagation, are there any questions that I can answer?
I have not seen any in the chat.
Okay.
So, but if you guys have questions, just put them in the chat, and we will get to them. But I think, Sarah, you can
go on
and upward. Yeah.
All right. So vegetative propagation. Plants have vegetatively propagated themselves since the beginning of plants, and they're really good at it. And all we need to do to propagate plants vegetatively is just do what they do. Just give them a helping hand. That's all we need to do. So what are the advantages? They still do this. Even after they decided they would produce flowers, they still do it vegetatively. So there's got to be a reason for that. And the advantages to the plant are, number one, that they're self-reliant. They don't have to have a sexual counterpart. They don't have to have pollinators. They can do this all on their own. Cloning, the plants that they get from vegetative propagation is the exact clone of the parent plant that presumably was very successful in its environment. So, and this little plant that's in this picture right now is a colocasia, and I was digging out and found this thing growing where I knew I hadn't planted a plant before. So I thought, well, what the heck is going on? And I followed the stem back, and sure enough, what had happened was when the colocasia leaf got so big, it flopped over. And can you see the pointer right here? This is where the leaf was. And at the tip of that leaf, it sprouted roots and it sprouted leaves and made a whole new plant. So cloning that little plant right there is an exact clone of the parent plant. There's another advantage that it has is that it can actually protect its progeny. That parent plant is going to feed that little plant, that new plantlet, until it grows those roots. Strawberries is a really good example of that. Strawberries will will feed their little strawberry plants until they grow those roots. And it allows them to move away from the parent plant. So you'll see trees that sucker, and the sucker is like a foot away from them. So it doesn't go as far as the seeds go, but it does allow them to move. Let's see. Now, the reason why they are so, I've known for a long time that I could do cuttings and I could do layering and all vegetative propagation, but I never knew why. And the reason why is because of something called meristematic tissue. And meristematic tissue is a group of undifferentiated cells that can turn into a stem, a leaf, or a root. And there are certain areas in the plant that have these meristematic tissue. And the first one is apical buds. And the apical bud is at the top of the stem and at the tip of a root. So just keep that in mind. The next one is a lateral area, which is around the vascular area. So it's that is the undifferentiated cells that divide, they multiply, and they actually put girth on the plant. And the second one is intercalary, and that is that little fat area just where the leaf, the petiole of the leaf, it hits the stem. That's a meristematic tissue group right there. So the advantages for us is, if we do vegetative propagation, is that we get identical plants. So if we find a plant that we really like and we want that plant without any variety of it, we can do vegetative propagation and get that. We also get larger plants quicker than seedlings, because when we do a vegetative plant, we're going to get a whole lot more tissue than the seedling. And we have the advantage, any cutting that you make or any layering that you make is going to be the same maturity as the plant that you took it from, rather than in the seedlings. We took a field trip over to Tony Avent's place, and there was the small tree that, as soon as I saw it, I said, that's ivy. How in the world is it in a tree-like shape? So I asked Tony about it, and he told me that the ivy grows in two stages. And the first stage is the youth stage, which is a vine, and it grows all the way up to the top of the tree. And the second stage is a woody stage. And so in order to get that tree, that little tree, he had to go all the way to the very top of the tree that the vine was growing on, where it started its woody stage, and take a cutting of that woody stage. And to me, it's easier than seeds, because it takes we just have to give the plant what it wants. It's doing this anyway. I know there are other people that are seed starters that probably think that seeds are easier. So that is a subjective observation. Now, there are basically 5 ways of vegetative propagation, which sounds like it is very easy and simple, but under each one of these ways is several different subdivisions of that. I'm only going to go over division, layering, and cuttings in this talk. Grafting is a whole nother class, and tissue culture is always done in a very sterile lab. So it's not really something that the home gardener can do. Now, division is used with clumping plants like daisies, bulbs, and grasses. This was my introduction to plant propagation when I first started at Duke Gardens. Jason, I guess it was about the second week, Jason brought in this plant that was bursting out of its pot. And he gave me this great big knife and he said, all right, divide this plant into 4 different plants and pot them up in gallons. And I looked at this plant and looked at this huge knife and I said, oh, this is it. My career as a propagator is over. I'm going to destroy this plant. They'll never ask me to come back. So I turned around and I looked at my friend. My friend said, just do it. So I said, fine. And I divided that plant. I hacked it into 4 different, and I mean hacked it. I really just took that knife and said, I'm just going to cut this like a cake into 4 different sections. I potted the sections up and I thought, well, that's it. They're never going to ask me back, but they did. And about a month later, I went back into the greenhouse and looked at those 4 plants, and they looked like 4 fully mature plants in 1 gallon. So I had taken 1 plant and created 4 plants of the same size. It was pretty inspiring to me. It doesn't hurt the plant. Plants have evolved to be munched on. They have evolved to be eaten. So when an herbivore comes around and grabs a hold of a clump of grass and pulls half of it out, that other clump of grass is fine. It's going to grow into that. It's actually going to benefit it. It is the most labor intensive, but it does yield plants instantly. So let's talk a little bit about when, what, and how. You can divide all year long. It's best to divide in early spring plants that don't bloom in early spring. You can start dividing plants in early spring when they're about 3 inches above the ground. And then late spring and early summer is a good time to divide plants that bloomed in the early spring, right after they finish blooming. And then summer is the time for oriental poppies, iris, peonies, and you want to do them after they bloomed and when their leaves are starting to deteriorate. Now, here in the South, we are lucky that in the fall, we can just do just about anything, and you can divide just about anything, except for oriental poppies. And I'm sorry, I don't know why you can't divide oriental poppies in the fall, but do it in the summer. If you have to divide something that is out of its normal time to divide it, that's fine. Just make sure that you water it really well the night before, and then try and do it on a day that's going to be cloudy. So with suckers in the upper picture right there, this is something that the plant does all by itself. And some of the suckers will go ahead and root, and all you have to do is take them off from the adult. Some suckers, if you take them before they have their roots, they're very easy to root. That's just that is their function. They're going to root. Offshoots, that's suckers. Offshoots are stolons and rhizomes, and stolons and rhizomes can be long or they can be so short that the little pups, what we call pups, looks like it's part of the plant. Both of those are normally nurtured by the parent, but they also root very easily. If they haven't already rooted, you just need to very carefully remove them from the plant and then have some way of pinning them into the ground until they form those roots. And then multi-plant clumps. Multi-plant clumps may look like one plant, but each one of those stems is a plant and roots. So they respond very well to division, and actually these are one of the plants that do better if you divide them, because you give them a little bit more room. It takes a little more physical work to dig them up. You can either dig up the entire plant or you can split it, and then the portion that you take out, you just fill in with more soil. Now, division is also done with bulbs, corms, tubers, and rhizomes. And I'm going to stop sharing right now so I can show you a little bit. And here's my examples. I don't know if you can see them, but I'll hold them up to you. Bulbs, like this onion, you can see that this is half an onion. They actually divide. Bulbs are a modified leaf base. So with onions, there goes my vegetables again. With onions, the more leaves you have when you first start your onions, the bigger your bulb is going to be, because every layer of that onion is the base of a leaf. So give them lots of nitrogen, feed them well. And then once they're ready to divide, you can see from this onion, I think, that it is half an onion. It has an outer coating that protects it, and the onion actually divided in that outer coating. So I just pulled one half of it off, and this is the other half. So they divided by themselves. Let's see if I can get corms. Corms are a little bit different than bulbs. They form at the base of the plant, and they form what's called cormels, which actually is, oh, I wrapped this really well. Okay. Can you see that? Put this white up against it so you can see it. See how it's just created these little cormels right along the way. And this is very easy to do also. You just divide up all those little cormels and plant them, and you get new plants. And then we have, let's see, tubers. Tubers are like this, like everybody recognize this? A little potato. Tubers are part of the plant's root, and everywhere it has an eye, it has the ability to grow a new plant. So if you want to divide your tubers, what you'll do is cut it up so that you have 2 or 3 eyes in each one of them. And I always say, just let them sit out for 2 or 3 days so that where you cut them can scab over. And then rhizomes are stems that grow laterally across the soil surface. And some examples of those are peonies, mint, and some ferns. If you've ever had mint, you know how it grows like this and it makes a plant. And it grows like this and it makes a plant. And all you have to do is cut those in half. All right, let me share screen again. So layering is the next one, and layering is a process of inducing roots to form on a branch or stem while it's still attached to the parent. And plants do this naturally. They love to layer, and they can do that because remember the meristematic tissue? The meristematic tissue, the undifferentiated cells, is influenced by the environment. So if they hit ground, they're going to produce roots. If a root at the tip of a root hits air and light, it's going to produce a stem. And anybody that has ever grown a plant and seen a stem growing out of the bottom of the plant, that's what happened. The root got out through the drain hole, it hit air and light, and so those undifferentiated cells said, don't be a root anymore, be a stem. And so that's what happens. It is the oldest form of vegetative propagation. Let's see, it doesn't produce as many plants as with maybe cuttings, but the plants that it does produce are more mature. And there are 7 methods of layering, and we're going to go through those really fast. And the first one is natural layering. Like I said, plants do this naturally. You can see mint on the left-hand side and the strawberries on the right-hand side. Simple layering is when we facilitate this natural process. And as you can see by the drawing, I'm a lot better gardener than I am an artist, so just bear with me. Simple layering is good with woody shrubs that naturally have branches that meet the earth. And the way you do this is take the branch that's close to the ground, mark both the branch and where the ground where the two of them meet, and then dig out a shallow area of the ground and mix some compost in there or some potting soil in with the natural soil, put it back in there so the soil is loose and friable, and then take the branch, wound the branch, so you open up that cambium layer and put a little bit of rooting hormone on it, and then just anchor it into the ground. And in this picture, you can see I have a spike under the ground holding that branch down, but it could be a rock on top of it. It doesn't have to be anything that to hold that branch down into the soil will work. With branches that are really pliable, I like to go ahead and put a stake just to get that growth started upward. You don't have to worry about that. You can leave it laying on the ground and then correct it when you cut it off and pot it up. Tip layering is something that the rubus family, blackberries and raspberries, do. If you see blackberries out in the wild, they're going to be growing in that zone between a forest and a clearing. And how they manage to stay in that position is that their canes, they push their canes toward the sun, and where it hits the ground, it buries itself about 5 inches in there, and the meristematic tissue on the tip will turn into a new roots and stems. So if you have blackberries that you want to propagate, all you have to do is take a cane that the ones that produce fruit that year, they'll start to elongate, and you take that cane and just let it grow right into a pot, and you'll have a new blackberry. A serpentine layering is something that you do with a vine, and you can get a lot of plants out of one vine by doing this, because the vine will grow roots anytime it touches a surface. That's how they grow up trees. That's how they grow along the ground. So all you have to do is just pin them into different pots and then leave them alone until they grow roots. This picture is actually a picture of Lanistra canadensis, or the American honeysuckle, or the red honeysuckle. I was having a terrible time propagating it from cuttings, so I finally just pinned it down into a pot, and I'm happy to say that we have been very successful with it. Once you see the roots coming, and you can see by the bottom of this that there's plenty of roots, you just remove it from the parent plant and you've got your new plant. This one is something that usually the homeowner is not going to do, but I thought it was so cool that I wanted to keep it in there. And this is called trench layering. Nurserymen, when they want to make more rootstock out of one plant or one tree, they'll bury the entire tree in a trench, and everywhere there's a branch, the branch will make a 90-degree turn and go towards the sun. And everywhere that 90-degree turn is, roots grow. And so they leave it in the ground for a year, and then they dig it up and they just cut off their the new plants, and they multiplied their rootstock. And we can do something like that at home on a smaller basis, and it's called stool layering, where you take a tree that is planted early spring, you cut it off, and it will come back with multiple branches. And so when you see those multiple branches, you just pile up about a foot of soil around them. Well, I usually wound them and put a little bit of rooting hormone on them. It may or may not need it. You can do a mild rooting hormone. Leave it like that for a year, and then the next spring you just wash off the soil with a hose and you can take it out. And there's another sample of that. If you have a small pot, you can do the same thing by just dropping the whole plant into a larger pot and filling the larger pot up with soil. Air layering is one of the more exotic ways of layering. It's been around for a long time. Let's see. Chinese writings that were in 7000 BC describe doing this by putting a sticky ball of mud around a wound on a branch. Woody shrubs and trees that don't necessarily go down to the ground are a good candidate for this. Oleander, camellia, rubber plant, fiddle leaf fig propagates successfully with air layering. And one of the things that is different, though, is that a rubber plant is monocot, and the camellia or the oleander is a dicot. And what I mean by that is when they first germinate, monocots will come out with a single leaf. And you'll see this in grasses. Well, a rubber tree plant is actually a grass. You'll see this, corn is a grass. Not that you would want to air layer corn, but I'm just saying that there is a difference. And the difference is that the monocot stem, the vascular bundles are all the way through the stem. They're just scattered all the way through the stem. And the dicots, the ones that have 2 leaves when they come out, the vascular bundles go around the stem. So when you're doing an air layering, you have to keep that in mind. With the monocot stem, you want to cut diagonally into the stem and then hold it open with a toothpick. With the dicot stem, you're going to take the bark off in a circle around it. And I'm going to stop sharing because I'm going to give you a demo on how to do this. Hopefully, can y'all see this? Can you see my plant here? Okay. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to brutally take off all of these branches because this is where I want to do it. You want at least a pencil size or bigger, but I'm going to do it right here and hopefully I'm going to do it right. All right, so the first thing that you want to do is take a very sharp knife or a razor blade. You can do either one. You're going to cut a circle around the tree with a slit, being very careful not to cut your fingers. And peel the skin off. See if I can get it off. All the way around. So what I'm actually doing is I'm exposing the cambium layer all the way around this branch. If I can get it all the way around. This thing is being difficult with me, of course. Okay. And then the next thing that you're going to do takes a little bit of talent. Once you get this wound all the way around, what you want to do is put a little bit of rooting hormone all the way around it. And I use a Q-tip. You can use a paintbrush. It doesn't matter whether the rooting hormone is liquid or whether it's powder. Just put a little bit of rooting hormone around it. And then, this is the tricky part. You want to make sure that this thing stays moist until it grows roots. So there's an art to this, and hopefully I'm going to be able to do this without anybody laughing at me. Wrap your plastic, and I've seen people do this with pop bottles. I've seen people do this with all kinds of different ways. So you wrap your plastic first around the bottom, then take moistened sphagnum moss, kind of wring it out a little bit so that it's not soaking wet. Pack it in there all the way around the wound. And then go to the top. Take another twist tie. Et voila. Ta-da! You're going to check this. You're going to leave this on here for at least a year. It will grow its roots right into that ball. And then when it gets finished, when you start seeing roots in there, you're going to cut it off. And you will have all of this as a plant, which is much bigger than cuttings or layerings that you get. A funny story, I was doing a demonstration at Duke Gardens about propagating, and this man came up with a piece that he had done. And he said, you can have this for your demo. And I said, okay, thanks. And then Jason came up and he said, this guy is notorious. He has been air layering trees all over Durham. And he air layered one of our 100-year-old Japanese maples in the garden. And he had the audacity to show up at Duke Gardens with this thing. Like, here I am, I did it. And I just went busted. But it's a great way to it's a great way to propagate a plant that you can't propagate from seed and really doesn't do well with cuttings. So there's an air layering. Okay, let's share screen again.
Hey, Sarah, I'm going to jump in just because this question feels really relevant right now. So Jeff was wondering, when you're doing that wounding, are you trying to do it so that you're not girdling the stem, or are you trying to go all the way around?
You're
You're
girdling.
girdling.
Now, if you can share why that doesn't kill the stem, I would be greatly happy with that. But it does not. It does not kill the stem as long as it's connected. All you're doing, what you want to do is take the outer layer out and expose that cambium layer, because that's where the roots are going to come from, is that cambium layer.
Yeah, and so I think part of it is actually that you're taking off. My understanding is that there is actually some transportation of nutrients and water even through further in tissues. It's just so minor that would kill it eventually. But because you're keeping that moisture in there and you're keeping that whole environment there, it is able to survive it. But obviously your goal is eventually to separate it. So that's okay.
And the only thing, one caveat I would say is, if you're going to air layer, just remember that once you cut that branch off, you've got a very small root ball and a large piece of the plant. So you've really got to baby that plant until it gets roots, it builds out its root ball. So yeah, just keep that in mind. All right, back to sharing. Where's my share? I've lost it. Where's the share?
Is it? Oh, no.
Oh, here it is. Here it is. Okay, got it. All right. Okay, so now we're going to go on to cuttings, which is actually my favorite and the one that the propagation team does the most. Let's go on. Let me go back a minute. I got so excited about air layering, I can't go on. When cuttings can be taken really depends on what method is best and what method is best. It really depends on whether the plant is herbaceous or woody and what growth stage it's in. So herbaceous plants are plants that are going to stay pliable and in the softwood stage, what we call a softwood stage. And this is like this pineapple stage. It's an herbaceous plant because it doesn't have to get hard, because what's going to happen with herbaceous perennials is that they're going to lose all their branches when the wintertime comes and they go dormant. So they grow brand new ones every year. Woody perennials are plants that are going to stay in that branches are going to stay, and they're going to be viable the next spring. They're going to continue to grow and put out leaves. And so they go through 3 stages. They go through a semi-hardwood, softwood stage when they first start to grow. Then they go into semi-hardwood stage in the middle of it, where they quit growing larger and start putting a little bit of girth and protection around their stems. And then they're in hardwood stage when they're dormant. And I'm hesitating to say this happens in the spring, summer, and winter. It normally does for most plants, but plants they're very individual. And so they could be in they could have a softwood stage all the way into winter. So it's really more about the growth stage than it is about the season, but there is some correlation between the two of them. And I've lost my place. I get so excited about all of this stuff and I lose my place. Cuttings are very successful with plants, and it is something that they do naturally. You would think they wouldn't, but they do. And when I was thinking about how this happens, I was thinking about this. I got this image of this huge dinosaur that walks over and he goes, and he gets a great big mouthful of plants, and he's walking and he's chewing, and the plants are falling on the ground and he's stomping them into the mire, and they're growing. And the mother plant's going over there. Yeah, this is just exactly what I wanted. If you can see the picture on the left-hand side, that's a picture of an Okinawa spinach. And I had cut that plant all the way down to the ground and gotten rid of it. And there were some pieces that had fallen on the ground. And about 2 weeks later, I was out there and I went to pick up this one branch, and lo and behold, it had rooted itself. I hadn't done anything but dropped it on the ground, and it had formed these roots. A cutting setup tray under a mist system or a plastic bag, a pot in a plastic bag, it really doesn't matter. what you put them in, as long as you follow a few things. The things that you're going to need are basically the same things that you need for seed starting. They need a medium, they need a container, light, warmth, and moisture. And then they also may need a little bit of rooting hormone to get them started. With a growing medium, one of the things that they need, one of the things that they need as far as the growing medium is, I did a research project for one of the classes at the propagation team on growing medium, because there's so many different formulas for the growing medium out there. And I'm happy to say that the one that I used was the most popular one, especially for home gardeners. It is 2 parts of perlite to 1 part of seed starting mix, or that milled moss, the milled peat moss or coir. And because what you want is the perlite is going to give structure and also give air, so that if your medium it gets too wet, the plants are going to rot. But if they dry out, they're dead. Drying out is the biggest hazard for cuttings. So you have to have that happy medium. Okay. Anyway, perlite, 2 parts of perlite to 1 part of seed starting mix is probably the best one. Don't use garden soil or homemade compost, again, because you can introduce pathogens into this very small container, which would just go ahead and get into the vascular system of the cuttings. And again, they would dry out, and that would be the end of them. Pots, you can come up with a myriad of different containers for cuttings. The one in the large picture there is my preferred one, because I can see I like it translucent, so I can see if there's water pooling in the bottom of them. Because I don't have my cuttings under a mist system, I hand mist them. I want to make sure they don't have drainage holes in them. So I want to make sure that that medium stays moist and not wet. Oh, I'm sorry. You also need light. And what you want to do with your light is you've got to have light, because you're going to leave some leaves. The leaves have to photosynthesize. So you're going to leave some leaves, but you don't want light that is like full sunlight on a clear dome like that. Would create an oven basically and just bake the plants. So indirect light. In the summertime, I put my cuttings out under the oak tree. In the wintertime, I'm not too worried if there's low western sun or early morning sun. That doesn't bother me, because I know they're not going to get hot. You also can't put them under incandescent lights, because for the same reason, you'll just turn it into an easy bake oven. In the wintertime, I have them on my seed starting tray under the fluorescent lights, and that does really well. They really like that. And just like seeds, they want a little bit of warmth. In the summertime, of course, that's not a problem. In the wintertime, I actually do have a heating pad that I put under them to keep the root zone warm. And also, if you're going to do hardwood cuttings, the trick to hardwood cuttings is to promote the root growth without breaking them out of dormancy. So if you have them outside, but you can put a little bit of warmth in the bottom and the root zone area, they work really well. Moisture, you need to keep that humidity up. You can't let the leaves that are photosynthesizing can't transpire water, can't pull water out of them. So you have to keep the dome on them until you take them out of the tray, and you have to keep them misted and moist. That is, I know I sound like I'm stressing this, but that really is the main thing that kills your things. And then rooting hormone is something that we tell the cells, this is what we want you to turn into. And whether or not a plant needs rooting hormones really depends on its ability and willingness, I guess you could say, to go ahead and put out roots. Most herbaceous plants are house plants, anything that stays soft during the winter, all its entire life, usually don't need any rooting hormone. When they're in the softwood stage, they may need a weaker solution of rooting hormone. Hardwood stages usually need a stronger solution. There's two kinds of rooting hormones. There's powder and there is liquid rooting hormone. The advantage to the powdered rooting hormone is if you're like me and you see a plant and you go, oh, I'd like to have some cuttings of that. You can take the cuttings, you can put them in the rooting hormone and stick them that day. The advantage to the liquid is that if you have several different types of plants and some of them need a higher, a stronger solution, you can put that liquid hormone in there, pour in the right amount of water to dilute it, do your harder, the ones that need the stronger solution, and then pour more water into it and do your plants that need a weaker solution. So that's just the advantages of the two different ones. And again, cuttings can be made from stems, they can be made from leaves, and they can be made from roots. And I'm going to stop sharing right now and do a little bit of a demonstration. And I've got to tilt my screen for this. Hopefully you guys, can you see this?
Yes. Yes.
All right. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to do a demonstration on a stem cutting. And there are two kinds of stem cuttings. There's tip cuttings and section or internodal cuttings. And if you can keep in mind that we're going to be using the meristematic tissue, and I'm just going to use these poor little gardenia branches that I cut off. You want your cuttings to be at least 4 to 6 inches long. You want, ideally, I'm going to say ideally, you want 2 nodes below the medium and 2 nodes above the medium, which hardly ever works because nodes aren't standard. So just try, but at least get 1 node below the medium. And I am going to make my first cut. I cut it on the diagonal on the bottom for 2 reasons. One is because, and you always cut below a node because that's where you want, this is where the roots are going to be coming out. Cut it on a diagonal to expose more the cambium layer and to know that this is the bottom of the cutting. Because if you plant it this way, it's not going to take. They have to be planted in the direction that they were growing on the plant. Now, we don't want all of these leaves because, like I said, they're going to transpire. So we're going to take most of them off. And some people strip them off with their fingers. I have done that when I've gotten busy. I think it's better to take them off with a razor blade or to pull them upwards, not downwards, because you don't want to tear the stem. So if you're going to take your leaves off with your fingers, pull them upward, not downward. You don't want to tear. And then at the very top, you're going to leave 2 leaves at the most. So there's my 2 leaves. Oh, you can't see this, can you?
We can, I can see it.
Okay.
Maybe others.
All right. So there's the 2 leaves. Now, if you have anything, any kind of a bud or a flower, immediately take those off. You don't want this thing putting any energy into making buds or flowers. Now, with a stem this big around and this hard, this is a semi-hardwood because it's already started to harden up. I'm going to go ahead and scrape a little bit right here, turn it over and scrape a little bit higher, just to expose 3 areas now that roots can come from. If it was a softwood or if it was much smaller, I might not do that. But with the stem this big and semi-hardwood, I'm going to expose some more cambium layer. And that is it. Put a little bit of rooting hormone on it, stick it in your tray, mist it really well, and just wait. The hard part is waiting. The hard part is going out every day and saying, did it make it? How many made it? How many made it is important too, because when you start your rooting tray, if you don't get 100%, you think I'm a failure. No, you're not. You're not. The success rate over at Duke Gardens with their beautiful greenhouse and their mist systems and their wonderful staff and everything is about 85%. For us at home with our home garden, with the home setup, it's about 45 to 50% is a really good success rate. So just keep in mind that if you want 1 plant and you're going to put in 10 cuttings, you may get 10 plants. keep the plant sale in mind, we will take them. So the next thing that I want to talk about is making leaf cuttings. And we're going to make a leaf cutting out of this eucomis. And believe it or not, this is a bulb, but you can make leaf cuttings out of this. Now, one of the things that you want to do with your leaf cuttings is, again, they have to be planted up. And when you make a bunch of sections of leaf cuttings, you might not remember which way was up. So what I do when I'm making a leaf cutting that's going to be cut into different pieces is, see if I can do this. The second section has a point on it, so I know that that goes up. And so here's the first section, and it has a natural point. Here's the second section, and I will do that all the way down the plant. So now here's the second section, and here's the third section. So I know that all of those, the point goes up. And there's other leaf things that leaves that you can do. One of the most popular ones is African violets. But African violets, what they need is they need a bit of the petiole. So you'll take the leaf off, but you'll also take the petiole and stick it down into the medium all the way up to the leaf base. And if you've ever tried to do leaf cuttings off of a jade plant and you get nothing but a bunch of roots. I mean, I did jade plants cuttings and they rooted beautifully, but I never got a plant. And that's because you need to have what's called a heel cut. You need a bit of the stem along with the leaf, because the stem will create the new stem and the leaf will create the roots. So just keep that in mind. All right, let's go back. Start share. I remember. All right. I just want to talk a little bit about root cuttings. I do not have a demonstration for root cuttings. Root cuttings is probably the least popular and the most difficult to do. Anybody that has tried to eradicate dandelions out of their yard knows that if they leave one single piece of a root, they are going to have a dandelion again in that area. Jan Little, who is the director of education at Duke Gardens, bought a house one time that had horseradish. And she thought she was going to eradicate the horseradish plant and ended up thinking that it was a lovely plant and was okay to be growing in her yard. If you're going to do root cuttings, one of the things that you want to do is if it's got lots of fibrous roots, then you're just going to cut them up, lay them on the surface of a tray, and then cover it up with some moist sand or some more medium and keep it moist, and it'll grow new roots. But the same thing with roots applies to cuttings. You have to have them oriented in the right place. So when you're making your root cuttings, keep in mind that the portion of the root that's closest to the plant is up. So the portion that when you do bigger root cuttings, like for example, acanthus, peonies, bee balms, and bleeding hearts have a fleshy root on them, then they are going to be planted vertically in the ground, about 1.5 to 2.5 inches deep on the top. The part that's closest to that was growing closest to the plant will be about 1.5 to 2 inches deep into the ground, under the surface of the ground. And if you're going to do root cuttings of woody trees, which are bigger, then they're about 4 to 6 inches, and they're going to be planted about 1 to 1.5 inches below the surface. And when I say they're going to be planted, what's below the surface is the part that is the top of the root, which is closest to the plant. After about 2 weeks, you can start checking your cuttings to make sure that they're rooted. And the best way to test that is to grab hold of them and like this, and then very, very gently give it a tiny little tug or a wiggle. If there's any movement whatsoever, they're not rooted. some plants, some cuttings take 6 months to root. When we did our camellias the first year that we were doing the prop team, it took 6 months before those things rooted. If you do a tiny tug and it's solid in there, then that is an indication that there are roots. Another thing that will happen is sometimes, like with figs, all the leaves are going to fall off, but there's still going to be a little bit of green on the top of it. And when you see new leaves starting to come out, that's an indication that they've rooted. And that is the end of my presentation, and I can go ahead and take questions at this point.
That was awesome. There's so many comments that are just like how much people love you. So one of the questions that kind of came up and people talked around it for a while was, do you have a preference? So there's liquid and there's powder rooting hormone. Do you have a preference on brands? Do you have anything like that?
As master gardeners, we actually, I don't. I have looked around for a lot of them, and I have done some research on them. And according to Dr. Durr, who is my go-to person, and Jason, who is my mentor, the brand isn't as important as the strength. And with powdered rooting hormone, you can get it at the big box stores, and what they sell in rooting hormone is a basic medium strength rooting hormone, and it does most of the stuff. It does really well. I prefer the liquid rooting hormone just because I like that advantage that it gives.
Yeah, and one thing I heard you say that I thought was just like such a good tip, this was an earlier class you gave, was that if you go with powder hormone, always basically pour a small amount out into another container so that you're not dipping ever directly into your,
right.
Yeah, but it's worth kind of like aliquoting it out.
Right, because it's rooting hormone, it grows stuff. So you don't want to introduce anything into your store. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for most of us trying this for the first time, the powder tends to be a good kind of like low stakes way to.
We were all sitting around in the prop team one time. We had our cutting boards out and our razor blades and our little paper towels with our white powder on it. And this guy walked in and he took one look at it and he went, "Oh my God." And we all looked up and went, "What?" And he said,
"They're having a good time." Everyone's riding high. It's good. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so a question that came up earlier. So if you're planning to transplant into the ground after dividing, can you do that at any point in the fall or only before frost?
So yeah, you can do it any point in the fall. The fall is a good time to do that. If you divide a plant, my suggestion would be to hold it in a pot until the roots recover for at least a week before you transplant it. But I know that you can go ahead and put it right back into the ground. Just make sure you keep it watered and don't let it dry out. Yeah,
exactly. So for some of the different layering techniques, by wound, you just mean it's an incision, basically.
It's a scraping off. It's the same thing that I did with this. You want to scrape down to the cambium layer.
Yeah.
Scrape it up, scrape it right down to the cambium layer.
So we're trying to go through them. And so, Sara, actually, do you mind taking a minute to talk about this didn't come up, but we all know and love Durr. Can you talk for a second about who Durr is and what some of the references you would recommend might be?
Oh, sure. I should have gotten the books.
No worries. Sorry.
The Secrets to Plant Propagation is one that is a good book to start with. It has lots of illustrations, and it does actually have some individual plants in the back. Michael Durr is, and I don't know the background on him, Ashley, you probably know better than I do, but his book is much more in-depth and in detail. And I would say 3/4 of the book is individual plants and how to propagate them from seed, from layering, from cuttings, and what they like and what they don't like, and what his research showed on each one of those plants, which is what I like.
Yeah, so Durr was faculty at the University of Georgia, and he has become the the guru, right?
Yeah.
Like he is kind of the beginning and the end for a lot of these conversations in terms of just the quality of references he put out. And so I'll link some of those in the chat.
Good.
And then two more questions we have. Do you recommend rooting hormone on leaf cuttings?
No, leaf cuttings don't need rooting hormone.
And then what if someone gives you a plant rooted in water? How best to get it into soil?
Okay. Now, and this is a very, Ashley likes to root in water because she likes to see what's going on.
It's trickier though. It is like,
it's a little trickier.
And Sarah, you'll say why, because they're not the right kind of roots.
No, they are. The roots that develop in water are different than the roots that develop in soil. So yes, absolutely. You can root things in water and transplant them into soil. All you need to do is just be aware that it's a different type of root, and you want to baby that plant just a little bit until it gets its soil roots developed and grown. So.
Yeah, and that's just kind of, I think of rooting in soil as your babying is all going to happen right up front, and kind of you're going to do that. Rooting in water, your babying is going to happen when the transition happens, just because I just get a thrill out of like plants lined up on my windowsill or my sink. So.
And it is good. But now, one thing that you need to keep in mind when you are rooting in water is that they still need oxygen. So take your roots out and stir your water about every 2 or 3 days to get that oxygen back in it.
Yeah, and I like to just straight up refresh that water period, like when I do that, because anyone who's watched it knows it gets kind of gnarly and gunky in there.
Yeah.
So awesome. Okay, so we're going to take a short break. One thing, I will include a link to this in the chat, but we have our last Bowl City Gardener Live session coming up in November. That is a class we've been doing for the public, but certainly everyone here is welcome to come. And Sara is one of our presenters for that, and she'll be doing another form of propagation. So if you're like, I just need more.
Oh, and I meant to give a shout out to Bev Tishy. Bev Tishy is the plant sale subcommittee chair for seed starters. So if you are interested in seed starting plants for the plant sale, get in contact with Bev Tishy.
Yeah. And just a heads up, the Bowl City Gardener Lives are unfortunately not recorded because it's literally just us out at Briggs, like getting into it. But there are 2 sessions, so there's a little bit of flexibility. So I'll put a link for that in the chat as well. So with that, let's take basically a 9-minute break. And so we will be back at 10:50 for wildlife management, critter management. So thanks, Sara. That was great. That was so much fun. So I'm going to stop this recording.